Anything you want to have stricken, just let me know. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Get Behind Me, Jesus. I am your host, Joe Cash, and with me today is a new friend, Joshua, and we're going to have a conversation about IFS, about psychedelics, anything that we're inspired to talk about. I'm so glad that you're here with me. Could you tell us who you are, what you find yourself doing, and what you hope to get out of our conversation here today?
Sure. So my name is Joshua Pritikin. I earned a PhD in quantitative psychology from the University of Virginia, almost 10 years ago. And in the last few years, I switched over to doing talk therapy using internal family systems. And I've written this book, Religion Unburdened by Belief, which is addressed to people who are spiritual but not religious, people who are not satisfied with the religions on offer, who are interested in exploring new ways to practice their religious inclinations.
Great. So in terms of the book, I'm curious if you could tell us, without spoiling, is there an elevator pitch for what religion is when it's unburdened by belief? What vocabulary you're working with when you say religion, when you say belief?
Right. So the book was inspired by an earlier book by James Carse, and the title of his book was Religious Case Against Belief. That's where I got the idea religion and belief might be pointing in different directions or somewhat antagonistic. And I felt like his book made a really compelling argument that was persuasive, but I felt like he dropped the ball about halfway through and didn't fully realize the potential of the idea. So that's what I set out to do in my book. And one of the refinements that I've made to his proposal is that instead of trying to eliminate belief in general or all beliefs, what I do is propose a taxonomy. So there's different kind of beliefs that have different functions, and some beliefs are necessary to enable exploration, where other beliefs are kind of have less immediate practical implications. So like whether, for example, whether what happens after we die, is that reincarnation or is it just like lights out? Like that, beliefs about that, they don't have any immediate practical consequence. So those are the kind of beliefs that we should kind of minimize our conviction in. I mean, it's fine to have those beliefs, but the amount of conviction you have in a belief should be justified by evidence. And yeah, so I don't know, I feel like I'm going in a bunch of different directions here. What should I talk about first?
That's fantastic because that's the way I feel all the time. So that'll work. I like that you mentioned immediate practical consequences. So I think it's good to start in the present. We can start with presence and what that means, sort of the taxonomy of belief that you mentioned, how that impacts our presence, what you think about our present existence. We could go in that direction. Also, the amount of conviction in belief should be justified, by evidence. I'm fascinated by that. So we could talk about that a little more.
Okay, maybe I'll start there with the evidence thing. So, So that's the other refinement I made to Carse's proposal is that it's not about eliminating beliefs, but about reducing our conviction in them. So if you have a belief about reincarnation, that's fine. But if it's more than a strong conviction, I'd be curious about why you need to believe that so strongly. And just to give some examples of how we can the link between evidence, the interaction between evidence and belief. I can believe it's hot outside and can confirm that belief by checking a thermometer or going outside. And so when I actually have evidence, then Then I can have high conviction of belief, like it's justified, and you could even call it knowledge. But different kind of beliefs require different kind of evidence. So suppose I believe I have strep throat. Well, it's like not that easy to tell. What you have to do is, swap my throat and then do a culture sample and look at it under the microscope, and so that it requires a different kind of evidence to confirm that belief and justify strong conviction, turn it into knowledge. Other domains are that have different requirements, or like history. In that case, you'd want to look for like historical accounts that coincide in some way, like independent accounts that talk about the same history. So that's how evidence might work in that domain. And but religion is kind of more like art appreciation. Like there are some things that are objective, like the artist's age, when the work was created, what kind of materials they used. But largely, it's like a subjective judgment of aesthetics, whether you are moved by the art piece or not. And most of the beliefs in religion, like we don't have a lot of evidence for them, or it's like not even clear how to find that evidence. So that's why like having strong conviction in them is probably unjustified, and also disbeliefs as well. Like since some things are like hard to explain, like I don't know, like children who remember or seem to remember past lives, like it's that kind of evidence is puzzling, but we don't know how to disprove that scientifically. So maybe that justifies a certain belief in reincarnation or past lives, but of low conviction. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious about the intersectionality of your work. So I'm wondering if you've investigated belief systems from multiple cultures, or if you're evaluating data from different, primarily American religions. And on top of that, if you can speak about whether or not there are some things that evidence suggests that a high or a strong conviction is justified in terms of those religious structures that we have.
Okay. Well, let me address the cross-cultural thing first. So other researchers have done work in this area. There's a book that was written by I think his name is Iliadi, who did like a very broad survey of shamanism across cultures, and like the book is just packed with belief systems. And if I was to analyze that, it would just be a mammoth project. But kind of the approach that I'm taking in this book is to look at the psychological dynamics that are animating belief systems, and that's how to make the analysis kind of more tractable, like less expansive, is to focus on the psychology behind them. And so I don't do much of a cultural survey. I feel like others have already done that, but I focus on the psychology that's like animating these beliefs. And also, like in terms of the which beliefs that I focus on, I focus on process beliefs. So the beliefs that enable exploration. For example, if you're going to practice meditation, you have to believe that it's possible to sit still and learn something about controlling your emotions. Maybe not perfectly, but to have that it's possible to have some influence over how you feel through practice. So those are the beliefs that I identify as like critical to sustain.
Okay. So I'm curious where internal family systems comes in, how you got involved with that, how that intersects your work, because just going through the website and reading about IFS and sort of what the core tenets are, I'm thinking that there's a little bit of overlap between your work, and I have questions about that, like if the internal systems function the way that are stated here within the IFS system, does that indicate some evidence or some conclusions that people are coming to about the relationality internally and externally? I don't know if that makes sense. So the question is whether...
Well, maybe, Joey, are the listeners already familiar with internal family systems, or should I just give a quick intro?
No, yeah, let's do a quick intro on IFS, and then, yeah, we'll talk about how that intersects what you're doing and what drew you to that.
Okay. So internal family systems is a talk psychotherapy model. It was developed by Richard Schwartz some decades ago. And he was trained as a family therapist. So, working with families going through challenges like divorce or domestic violence and, probably with kids involved. But he also had worked with individual clients. Some of them had eating disorders. And what he noticed is that his clients with eating disorders would describe their internal experience in a way that was very similar to his experience working with families. So, perhaps someone would describe, oh yeah, I have this part that's holding a lot of pain, and then there's another part that comes in and uses food to soothe or numb that part that is holding all the pain, and then another part comes in and shames me for it. And so they're describing their internal experience in terms of subpersonalities. And probably the easiest way to understand parts is to recall a situation when you felt mixed feelings. So suppose you're driving to work late. Maybe a part of you wants to get there on time. Another part is afraid of being pulled over by the police. Another part may be frustrated with yourself for not leaving enough time to begin with. So internal family systems is a way of unpacking mixed feelings into the individual subpersonalities and then improving the relationship between the parts and between those parts in yourself. So that's like a little intro to IFS. So now I'm curious to understand your question better.
Yeah. So that sounds to me like open and relational theology, especially in terms of the relationality. One of the core Christian beliefs is the belief in a triune God. And classic theism sort of bent over backwards to describe that God as relational but unified, but usually came out in classic theism as a God that is impassible or does not change, and a God who is interested in control. So he's not, this God of classic theism isn't interested in us per se, unless there is some usefulness that we have to said God. But that God exists in a relationality that we are ostensibly made in the image of. So open and relational theology emphasizes that relationality throughout all of creation. All of our relationships are important. We have relationships with each other. We have a relationship with the Spirit. And all of those things are built on Alfred North Whitehead's metaphysics. I don't feel like I'm explaining it really well, but my curiosity is in that relationality. So if IFS describes each human being as a system of protective and wounded inner parts that are guided by a core self, that's essentially Trinitarian language. If we were to take that and use the vocabulary of Christianity, that's an understanding of what it means to be created in the image of an interrelationality deity, who has multiple inner parts that are expressed in different ways that work together. So I'm curious what you think about that theologically and whether or not that has any intersectionality with your work in IFS or with your research on the book.
Okay. So when you say Trinity or like a three-component God, like is that like the Father and the Holy Spirit and the child? Is that kind of what it maps
Son,
out
and Holy Spirit is the Trinitarian belief, and they are all mutually deferring to one another. That's the nature of their relationality is submission to one another.
Mm-hmm.
But the creeds indicate how classic theists thought that they existed. That both the Son and the Spirit emanate from the Father, but they are equal. So we don't have to get into like the creeds or anything like that. But to answer your question, yeah, Trinitarian would be Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Okay. So like would it I'm not sure if it would be like permissible to label those as like ideal roles or archetypes. I'm just trying to figure out if there's like a analogous language that we could use from psychology that would fit over the same concepts. I'm just curious about that.
Right. Me too. That's why I was fascinated by the IFS description, because that kind of internal relationality makes sense in terms of what I've been taught or what I'm exploring now in theological concepts. This is a way to describe the belief system about the personhood of divinity, and what that looks like. So I'm just interested in that, what roles that's played in your thoughts about religion.
Mm-hmm. And then what is the self's role in this system?
So that's the part about Trinitarian belief that is tricky, because if we're talking about three unique individuals that are co-relational to form a singular identity, then I don't know how to articulate what it means for that person to have a self, other than the cohesive self being some product of the relationality between the individual parts, like maybe a sum of the parts. That's an interesting question.
Okay.
So yeah, I don't know what the self would be in a Trinitarian context. I mean,
Can
in
I,
terms of, yeah, go ahead.
no, I'm just curious, like, can I ask you like a couple questions that I might ask one of my clients that I'm facilitating IFS from?
Yeah,
Or-
absolutely.
Okay. So, suppose you're holding a baby, say like, I don't know, a year old or something. And I don't know, it's just, hanging out. Maybe it's one of your relatives' children. And so how do you feel towards that child? Just for example.
Yeah. For me, I don't think the context would change as much depending on whether or not they were family or not. It could be a
Okay.
stranger's child, but for me, I would feel relatively the same way. I would feel compassion for that child. I would feel an urge to protect that child and to care for that child. The curious part of me would reflect on the beauty, or to use another Christian vocabulary word, the miracle of the child's existence, that kind of thing. So there would definitely be a connection.
Okay, yeah, a sense of connection. So you
Hmm.
mentioned compassion, care, and connection, and
Hmm.
this is in internal family systems. This is how we can identify qualities of self, is by asking, how do you feel towards a part? In this case, a child you are holding, but it could also be parts of yourself. And so I guess I'm going to, like, you were struggling to define the self and how it relates to this Trinity, the theological Trinity. And so I was just showing another way to get to the qualities of self by asking the question, like, how do you feel towards? And then the part that I had asked you to imagine would be like a child, but it could, like, the same question could be used to, if the part was one of your own inner parts. And so this is
Hmm.
a way of like identifying aspect of the self. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah. So I think with that example, I think Trinitarian theology is dealing with both three individual selves and a fourth sort of self or identity that is like an amalgamation of the relationality between those three individuals. Yeah. So that's just what I'm thinking. I have to defer to other scholars who've studied more about that and see what they think. But that's an interesting question to explore.
And so, like, identifying these qualities of self is a key step in IFS, because the other kind of I can't think of the word, but the feeling of compassion and care, like these are things that parts generally find comforting. So, like, that's how we can set up a like healing mental injuries, is by accessing the self energy and then helping the personal self connect with injured parts. I don't. That's a bit abstract. I should probably actually do an example, but
So let's talk more about your research in the book. What are some key thoughts do you think are important in this conversation of self and identity?
so maybe I could talk about how I suggest that, like, one conduct a meditation practice. Like, that might be a good place to start. That's like a key practice in my book. Are listeners already familiar with how meditation works?
In general, yeah. Most of us are processing traumatic conservative Christian experiences. So definitely firmly within the evangelical crowd, people that have come out of, evangelicalism with a lot of questions, wanting to hold on to the sense of community and the sense of purpose that sort of instilled in us, but wanting to get rid of bloated dogmas and patriarchal, closed-minded ideologies that exclude the vulnerable, particularly the poor, the orphan, the immigrants, LGBTQ folks. So yeah, in to varying degrees will have experience with other theologies, with other religious practices, but I think it's safe to say that meditation will probably be something that they're exploring or curious about.
Okay, great. So like the process generally how meditation is taught is that you would select something like a target to focus on. Suppose your breath. Suppose you're like monitoring your breath, and then as you're doing that, you may find yourself distracted or become absorbed in some emotion, and then you're asked to notice when that happens, and then return your focus back to your breath. Is that a
Hmm.
common process? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so the concern, like from an internal family systems perspective, is that when you become distracted by these parts, like and then redirect back to your breath, like you're kind of ignoring them, and
Hmm.
they could feel ignored, they could feel neglected. So to counter that, I suggest a slightly modified practice where instead of immediately returning back to your target focus, you just have a notepad next to you. You jot down what the issue is. Maybe you're planning what to make for dinner, or thinking about maybe a discussion you had with a friend the day before. To make note of what the matter is that came up, and then return back to your focus. And then after your meditation session, go back over those notes and give some attention to each of the parts that showed up. And when you do this, you're accomplishing several things. You're letting those parts know that you care. You're trying to address some of the needs that those parts raised, and then you're also teaching the parts that they don't need to be so impatient, that if they can leave you alone while you're doing meditation and just keep quiet, then you'll still come to give them attention and get their needs addressed. So through this like slightly modified practice, this is a way to accelerate your progress in meditation. What I mean by progress is a sense of effortlessness. Like in my mind, that's what you should be trying to achieve in meditation, is like this, that the sense that meditation is easy.
The word that comes to mind is integration. I would want to call this like an integrative meditative process. And it sounds like the purpose is to basically teach all those parts of you how to be effortless in practicing stillness and presence.
Yeah, that you said that very beautifully. Yeah, that's a good summary.
Okay. Yeah. So integration, neurobiology, I'm thinking of neurodivergence, ADHD specifically. One of the difficulties that a lot of people mention about practicing meditation is that they can't get their mind to be still. I'm neurodivergent, ADHD, and like this just blew my mind in terms of a practice that I can integrate when I'm trying meditation, because inevitably all of these things are going to pop up, and there's going to be like repeat offenders. I'll constantly have financial anxiety or something like that will continue. And I've got 3 kids, so thoughts about kids, and one of them's going to start driving, they're doing band, they're in school, like all of these things are inevitably things that come up. So what does the resolution look like if you're taking those notes and you're spending the time to actually go back and to address those parts that come up? What does that integration specifically look like? So take me past the note taking. When you're finished with the meditative practice and you go back to review those notes, then what does that look like?
Yeah. What does it look like? Maybe just take 1 or 2 minutes with each of the parts and see, like, at least acknowledge it, that it came up, and see if you can like make some progress on addressing its needs. Like for like financial concerns, like you may not be able to do anything, but at least you can acknowledge it. For other concerns, like maybe there's like a specific thing that came up with one of your kids, like I need to talk to this kid about this thing. So then you can go do it. And so this way, like I totally understand how meditation can feel overwhelming, and like that you could have just like a complete crowd of parts, just with like a constant conversations in your head all the time. So in that case, like you should probably not spend too much time. Maybe just start with like a short meditation, 5 minutes, that seems more feasible, and then work up to longer durations as your practice develops. But it's something that, I don't know, depending on how crowded your head is, like it may take a while before you get there.
Right, right. So stepping back a little bit, talking about religion, we talked a little bit about the distinction between religion and belief, the idea that they may be antagonistic. So I wonder if we could go back and talk about religion. How would you define religion? I've quoted it since I spoke with him, but a guest of mine, Steve Ferrari, said that religion is the bureaucracy of spirituality. So, which I like that, and I mostly agree with, but I think that there are open and inquisitive frameworks that are helpful. And I think there are other religious frameworks that are not helpful. And so I would want to encourage people to get rid of unhelpful frameworks, but to try to keep and cultivate and develop helpful frameworks. And so if there is system, a structure, practices that are helpful, like this sounds to me like this integrative meditation that we're talking about sounds like a religious practice that would be very helpful. So how do you think of religion? What do you think?
Okay, yeah,
core definition.
Joey, these are really great questions. So I'm using the definition of religion that Kars came up with, and his definition doesn't really distinguish from spirituality. So in his mind, and my book also follows this, is that religion and spirituality can be something you do alone, something where it's like experiences of beauty and awe and connection. Like those are the kinds of experiences I'm talking about when I'm talking about religious experience. And then the kind of the administrative structure that tends to develop around organized religions, Kars saw that more as like a belief system and not so much as a religion. And so Kars's definition of a religion is something that's lasted a long time. Well, basically a community and identity that's lasted a long time. That's his it's like three components, like community, identity, and that seems to do okay in distinguishing religions from belief systems, because belief systems tend to be shorter lived. Maybe it's unusual for like a belief system to last more than 500 years, and 1,000 years is pretty unlikely. So that when you get up into 1,000 years, it's mostly religions that have been around that long, and not so much belief systems.
Okay.
Now you also mentioned, let's see, why. You packed a lot in that question, so I'm trying to get back to the beginning.
Sorry, always. Yeah.
Where let me try to remember. So you were asking why is it important to minimize beliefs, to make space for religious experiences, and have a good example. Like if you look in the Bible, the story of Moses encountering the burning bush, like he encountered that without really many expectations about what he would find. If he had a strong belief that a burning bush is an ill omen, then history might have taken a different turn. So that's kind of the lesson that I draw from that story, is that by minimizing our conviction and beliefs, we're making ourselves available to receive religious experiences that, when they do happen to us, we're more available to receive them.
Do you think so is there a quality that we could point to that maybe as a way to articulate that? Would that be like curiosity or an openness that allows us to sort of hold those convictions loosely, so that if we encounter things that maybe we would consider an ill omen or something that we haven't experienced before, it's that curiosity or that openness that prevails and allows us to engage it, which is what produces the result?
Yes. Yeah, that's a good way of saying it. And maybe I could introduce another concept from internal family systems that will be able to talk about it in a little more depth. So there's this concept called being blended and unblended with a part. And so it's easiest to explain by example. Like suppose there's a part of myself that is very anxious about doing interviews, and if I blend with that part, then it'll take over my behavior. I'll be maybe frozen with anxiety and my mind will go blank. I won't know what to say. But if I can stay unblended from that part, then I still feel its anxiety. I still understand why it's upset about being in an interview situation, but it trusts me enough not to like take over my behavior. So the key thing here is to help parts stay unblended is to develop a trusting relationship with them, and then you can stay more self-led and available to whatever experience arises. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So the core self that sort of directs the internal system, that's the decision making or the driver, sort of the pilot in the system.
That's yeah, like the most thoughtful part of yourself. That's kind of who we want in the driver's seat.
Right. But that's only effective for somebody that's integrated and that has trusting foundational relationships with the other parts that are interacting internally.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the task of personal development, is to develop these trusting relationships, because, when in our upbringing, we often suffer insults or, challenges that cause parts to lose trust in us. So our task is to reestablish a relationship with these parts of ourselves so that they don't have to take over anymore. Like many people may still be struggling with parts that are angry, and when those parts take over, then they start shouting and throwing things, right? And so our task is to understand what that anger is about, and help that part to develop a more trusting relationship, so it doesn't have to, like, the anger can still be there without that like childish behavior.
Right. Well, like in my case, I feel like my anger with, or my frustration with my experience in evangelical church, I'm past the point where there are like, lost my screen. I'm past the point where there are like outbursts, emotional outbursts, or like aggressive behaviors. But I find that anger can still prevent me from building relationships, for example, or I'm experiencing different aspects of new community because I'm so frustrated and angry with the old community. Okay, so I'm curious about the intentionality or the motivations of those parts, those internal parts. Would you say that that's protective? Is it self-preservation? The reason why those parts would act out or would take over,
I mean, that's a great question. Can you are those parts present? Would they be willing to say more about that? Like, can we ask them, what are you afraid would happen if you weren't angry at your old congregation?
What do I think would happen? I think there's a couple of things that would probably change. One of those would be that I would stop blaming myself for perceived wasted time or wasted energy. If I could reconcile myself to, my experiences and just sort of, maybe it's radical acceptance. Maybe it's just recognizing that I can't change the past, that I did the best that I could, and, it's time to move on.
So
Then there would be,
hold on, Joey.
yeah,
So
go ahead.
you feel like you invested a lot of time with that community, and you're like frustrated with yourself that it looks like a wasted investment now. Is that the issue?
Right. Yeah. There's also a sense of betrayal. It feels like, especially moving from a mainline Christian experience into a conservative evangelical Christian experience, sort of the opposite direction from openness. It became much more exclusive, much more closed in. And there's a sense of frustration that I deal with in myself, sort of like, feeling bamboozled, like frustrated that I fell for it, that whatever values I thought I had for openness, for inclusion, for curiosity, that those were somehow ignored, as I traveled down a path that other people told me I was supposed to go down, or, people that I trusted.
Yeah.
Or subduing those parts of myself to try to be who I thought I was supposed to be. So that's some of the frustration as well.
Yeah. I mean, that's really hard. Like, I can relate to that. Like, I've also been involved in like not evangelical, but other kind of groups that have been labeled cults, that, where like the kind of religious practice we were doing, like, had some deficits, like that didn't support my development as well as it could have. And it sounds like that's what the frustration and betrayal that you're reporting, that resonates for me too. Like I could see why you'd feel that way. It makes sense.
Yeah. So back to that sense of cohesive system with multiple parts. I wonder, is there some underlying purpose like self-preservation that sort of motivates those parts to function the way that they do? And the healthy relationships between the self and those parts is sort of an assurance, a mutual assurance. Like if you were to say to those parts, thank you, I recognize the concerns that you're bringing up, and I want to work hard to address those things. And then the anxiety kind of says, yeah, I trust you to address those things. Thank you for acknowledging that, and let's move forward productively. Does that sort of paint a picture of what a coherent internal system looks like?
Yeah, I think you were narrating how you could respond to those parts, like by letting them know that their experience makes sense and that you're trying to move past it, and that, yeah, I mean that sounds like a healthy way to respond. And like it may not, those wounds of betrayal and frustration like that, it may take some, that those may be hanging around for a while, until you really feel their emotions fully. That's usually what parts need, is to really feel understood. So,
and that
but it sounds like you're on the right track.
Yeah. So is talk therapy one of the modes that allows us to do that? And what are the differences between talk therapy and other modes of therapy? And is that the goal, is to accomplish that sort of reconciliation between the parts?
I agree with your idea about, how we're, what the healing process looks like. And like if you were to ask me, should I do meditation or should I do talk therapy? Now is that kind of the question you're getting at?
Well, let's take that question. What would be the difference between meditation and talk therapy in terms of this healing process?
So the key thing to consider is how much trust do I have, among my parts? Like if your parts still have a lot of distrust and you are constantly blended with them, you feel swamped by anger and then by grief and then by, like, if there's this constant wave of emotions that are like a crowd, like many parts speaking at the same time, then meditation may be too much of a challenge. Like the most supportive environment is if you're working one-on-one with a talk therapist, and then you're free to blend with whatever part shows up, and the facilitator, the therapist, can help you to gradually improve your relationship, your trust with those parts that are blending, and then help them as your trust develops, then the blending will become less urgent. So that's the key thing to look at to make that kind of decision. Does that make sense?
Yes. And in my own therapy, I've discussed a practice of presence that involves thinking of myself as the sky, and those emotions or parts as weather in the sky. And as it passes, to acknowledge and experience it, but to recognize that it will pass. Does that sound like a helpful metaphor to you, or does that sound more like what we talked about earlier with meditation as a dismissal?
Let me just make sure I understand the question. You were saying that a process that you've used before working with parts is when a part came up, you would just acknowledge it, but it sounded like kind of stay unblended, like it wasn't taking over your behavior. You would just see it in the sky. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, the metaphor that my therapist used was that I am the sky. I am like the sky, and those feelings or parts are like weather in the sky. And
okay,
there are times when they come and they need to take the space and the attention to do what they need to do. But then once that's happened, then what remains is the sky. So in other words, I guess, to use the language that we're using here in this conversation, like they don't take over, but they've had their say, and what remains is the inner self, the core self that's trying to do the intentional work.
I mean, that sounds great. Like if that makes sense to you, if you feel like that resonates, then I mean that's great. I'm not sure I would use that analogy in a therapeutic way.
Mhm.
Like if there was a part present, like an angry part, then I'd want to focus on that angry part's concerns. See, what am I getting at? I guess my sense is like that sounds like more of a destination than a process.
Mhm.
And so like that once you had built some trust among your parts, then you could, mm, that kind of an analogy, like that you're the sky and the parts are the clouds, like that kind of analogy would probably resonate, would probably make sense. But I'm not sure that that's like an intervention, a way of helping to build trust between you and the parts. I'm not sure about that.
Right.
Does
So
that make sense?
so yeah, absolutely. And that goes back to conversation that we had over email about that middle space being space that's worth staying in and making sure that we don't move from one thing to another too quickly and actually do the work in the middle space. So yeah, that's helpful. Yeah, sorry, a lot to think about. I'm reading back through that email that we shared. Both of our projects treat deconstruction as incomplete if it just swaps one dogma for its mirror opposite. And I believe that. I think that the deconstruction and the reconstruction are a continual process, that it's cyclical and it's going to happen multiple times, but ultimately it's the goal isn't to exchange one dogma for another, but to do that work that you're talking about, that wholeness making work of actually addressing the parts and the concerns and learning what it is to be a whole person and then move through the world that way,
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah, maybe we could talk about psychedelics next because I've already kind of sketched out like a progressive sequence. So if you are constantly, blending with parts, if you bounce from one emotion to another, then a good place to start would be working with a top therapist. But if you've built some trust with your parts, then you could start with meditation and begin to develop that effortlessness. In my mind, psychedelics is like a next step. Like once you have developed some effortlessness in meditation, then the next step might be to explore psychedelics.
And so in your mind, what is the goal or the purpose of exploring psychedelics?
Yeah,
Is
yeah,
that a
that's a great question
self-awareness or an awareness of something else?
because psychedelics can be used for many different purposes, so many different intentions. And so there's a specific intention or a specific use of psychedelics that I advocate for in the book that I have a case study of. So I look at the Santo Daime tradition, which is a syncretic religion that is like a amalgamation of Christianity and religious traditions from South America. It's Santo Daime originated in Brazil, and they use
Mhm.
psychedelics in a very particular way. The way their ceremonies look on the outside is that everyone drinks some daime, or that's their name for the psychoactive drink. It's also known as ayahuasca, and then everyone is asked to sing hymns, and the hymn singing is very important because what you're doing when you're singing hymns is you're demonstrating that you're staying with the group, like that you know which lyrics to sing, you know what the rhythm, what rhythm is, like you're staying very present with the group. And one of the effects of the Daime tea, which is similar to other serotonergic psychedelics like psilocybin or LSD, is that it invites like a exploration of inner experience. So when you take these psychedelics, like what you have this inclination to explore your inner visions. Is that the audience familiar with psychedelics, the effects of psychedelics, or?
I can't speak for anybody personally because I haven't had those conversations, but my last interview, we spoke with Doug Redhill Pineda, who is the founder of the Church of Psychedelics and has
Okay,
helped with legislation of psilocybin in Colorado. So
okay, great.
he currently works with psilocybin in sacramental aspects of it. So he's working on putting together sort of a guidebook of religious practices that incorporate the drug into, daily use and sort of what the purpose is behind it, which was about the dissolution of ego in a recognition of the wider connectivity between us and each other, us and the earth. So I'm curious what that description of a psychedelic experience says to you. Would you say that there is more internal things that are happening with psychedelics, or is it primarily that sort of dissolution of self and broader connectivity that happens with psychedelics?
Yeah, so thanks for bringing that up. Like that's a one application of psychedelics to foster that dissolution experience, which is also very important. But in the Santo Daime, they don't use such high doses because the goal of the Santo Daime is to stay with the group. So if they notice that a participant isn't singing or isn't in harmony with the group, then you're asked to step away, maybe go to a nearby room to rest and recover.
Mm-hmm.
So it's in the Santo Daime are using the psychedelics with a very different intention than something like ego dissolution, which is also an important application. And I guess I wanted to reframe these intentions in using the vocabulary I introduced with blending and unblending.
Mm-hmm.
So like an ego dissolution or identity dissolving experience, like that would be like unblending from all parts. That's like the ultimate unblending, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But in the Santo Daime, what they're trying to accomplish is to take enough of a dose of the psychedelic that it's a meaningful challenge, that you're invited, like you feel the parts inviting you to blend, but then you refrain from doing so. So it's in a way the psychedelic it's kind of like with weightlifting. So when you're trying to increase your strength, you go to the gym, you lift to 20 pounds, maybe for a few weeks, and then 30 pounds, and then 40 pounds, and so you can gradually increase your ability that way. So the Santo Daime is kind of similar in that, but the psychedelic acts as the weight that you're, like the resistance weight that you're lifting against. You're asked not to go into the psychedelic experience, but to refrain from doing so.
Okay. To what end? What is the objective of? Because it sounds to me like just different approaches to the same experience, but I have a sense that you're describing a different experience altogether. So what's the objective in that sort of progressive exposure to the self and to the psychedelic experience without surrendering to it?
So what the participants in the ceremony are aspiring to do is to be present for each other, like in the consensus reality, not in some alternate reality, but in
Gotcha.
consensus. Yeah. So that's why, like, you couldn't say we're using the psychedelic as an escape, because it's really like the participants are asked to be present with each other and not go into the psychedelic experience. Which is actually very similar to what you're doing in meditation, right? So when earlier in the interview I described how meditation works, well, so you're sitting still, you're sitting quietly, and you're asked to sustain your attention to, say, your breath, right? And as parts come up, these are distractions that you may become absorbed in distractions, but ultimately you're trying to bring your attention back to your breath and sustain your attention on your breath, right? So what's going on in the Santo Daime ceremony is very similar to meditation, except you're asked to sustain your attention on the ceremony, on the hymns, and the distractions or emotions that come up, like that, you're asked to not be drawn into those like a private reverie, but to keep bringing your attention back to your not to your breath, but to the ceremony. So do you see, like, it's a parallel?
Yeah, I get it. What I'm thinking is that both experiences are focused on connectivity, but they're different angles, different layers of experience that bring you to that conclusion of connectivity, where the ceremony that you're describing is about being present to, what do you say, the consensual reality?
Yeah, consensus reality means
the consensus reality. So our
ordinary experience of just being sober and awake.
Right. And other psychedelic experiences where you lose that sort of grounding within the consensus reality, there still is an experience of like a vast interconnectedness, but the ego becomes dissolved, self becomes dissolved as it experiences this wider sort of network of relationality. So yeah, I mean, like what I'm thinking about. Is sort
Yeah.
of the
So
different experiences of connectivity.
so these are the two important experiences for religion. I think is the like this dissolution and being part of something larger than yourself. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's the experience that people have like identified long time back. Like they're like maybe that's one of the original goals of meditation is to experience that dissolution of ego, or many spiritual practices aim at that.
Mm-hmm.
But the same kind of a very similar process can be used to practice unblending, to like approach an effortlessness and staying unblended.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that both experiences must be valuable, especially when we're talking about spirituality, because on one level, it seems critical to understand the interconnectedness of the universe, but for somebody to be lost in that experience makes them no earthly good. And so you need that other pole of the experience to draw you back to the reason why you're a part of the consensus reality, the reason
To
why you're where
fulfill
you
your
are. And
purpose as an individual.
right, right. So yeah, there's sort of a localized relationality, localized community experience, and a universal community experience. It's systems on systems on systems, but taking that inner relatedness and then expanding it outward in degrees where we are recognizing that relationality between us and our neighbors, and then between us and the world around us, nature and creation, and then wider and wider. But you have to be able to sort of experience that within all of those levels for your life to be valuable, for you to recognize the value of the present, and for you to
Mm-hmm.
be a productive citizen, a good neighbor.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. The other thing I wanted to point out is that this practice with unblending is the key thing you need to make it easy to approach that non-dual dissolution experience,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because if you're constantly blending with parts, like if there's this chaos in your head, then it's going to be very difficult to have that like ego dissolution experience, right? So the unblending, practicing unblending is what should come first, because that's what makes it easy and enables the dissolution that allows you to feel the awe and beauty and connect to something larger.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that reminds me of something that I wanted to ask you earlier when we were talking about the difficulty of some people to meditate or even to blend and unblend. What does that look like for people with specific mental health conditions? Let's say for somebody that struggles with bipolar disorder. What is a blending and unblending look like for someone with that dynamic?
Well, bipolar is usually characterized by a part that's manic, that's like extremely optimistic, and then
Mm-hmm.
another part that is perhaps depressed, and maybe like alternating between them. So one they're either blended with one side or the other.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way that we can help those clients in talk therapy is to just get to know what those what's animating those parts. Like how did they, what's their origin story? What prompted them to either become manic or depressed, and what are their fears and concerns if they didn't do that? Like to build trust around those parts so that they don't feel such an urgent need to blend with the person and take over their behavior.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I understand. Tell me about your history. Did you grow up religious? How were you exposed to meditation? And then what made you interested in exploring these things?
Yeah, so as a teenager, I encountered some books written by Jung, and I I don't think I understood much, but it definitely inspired me or sparked my interest. I started practicing meditation, got interested in Eastern religions like Hinduism and Buddhism and Taoism, and I kind of sustained that as a hobby since then. But at the same time, that was a time when I was a teenager when personal computers were just becoming available, and I
Mm,
was fascinated by the possibilities of computers, and I just kind of accidentally took that up as a career and did software development in the tri-state area for a while, working for financial companies, and then I felt like that was just not very fulfilling. So I've been trying to kind of align my professional career with my hobby interests for a long time, and
yeah.
the first step on that journey was to go back to school and finish my bachelor's in psychology and then get a PhD. The PhD I got was like a research PhD, so it was about analyzing data, experimental design, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
So after doing that for a while, I felt like that wasn't very fulfilling either, and I guess I wasn't publishing enough papers, so I kind of got stuck in this postdoc and couldn't figure out how to move forward in my career academically. And at the same time, my family was going through some challenges. And so that's how I became exposed to internal family systems as a client. And as a client, I was like very impressed with the method. And I thought, wow, I could learn how to be an IFS facilitator, and maybe that would be a more fulfilling career, and it has been. Like I really enjoy. It feels like I'm helping people very directly when I'm doing talk therapy,
Mhm.
and so now I feel like my professional activities are more aligned with my hobbies interests as well.
Mhm. That's a tough line to walk. I definitely feel that. I've been in IT and higher education for 15 years, but parallel to that, I was a pastor in that conservative denomination for 15 years. So
Mm.
yeah, definitely feel that tension of wanting to align professionally with what I'm interested in. That's fascinating. I'm curious if there's any specific direction that you want to go. I'm really fascinated by your work. I can't wait to read the book. I'm sorry that I haven't before our conversation, but I really appreciate your
Well,
perspective on all this.
I'm really delighted that you're interested, and maybe we can do a round two after you've gone through it.
Okay. Yeah, for sure. That'd be great. So are you still involved in any Eastern religions, or is there a specific like religious community that you're a part of and where you're exploring these things of what community looks like? With that distinction between religion and belief practices, belief systems.
Well, yeah. So the reason I was able to write this case study on the Santo Daime is that there's a local church here in Oregon. It's actually the branch of the church that won the lawsuit that made the psychedelic religion legal in the U.S. So
Oh, nice.
I just accidentally moved very close to that church, and so I've been attending their ceremonies for about 4 years now.
Wow.
And yeah, in terms of like the beliefs of that church, like they don't really like in the Santo Daime, you're not required to believe anything really. It's a very process focused church. So
Mhm.
there isn't like a book that you're supposed to study or anything. Like it's very much practice focused.
So talk about, the basic ideas of, God and who we are and what we're here for and things like that. How do you make sense of any of that? What do you think about God? Is there God?
So what do you mean by God? Like the comes back to definitions.
Right, right. Perfect question. So in open and relational theology, there is divinity. There is a concept of a higher being that is described in some ways as the ground of all being, so the sustainer of reality, but also that allows for language like creator. It's believed to be a personal force that is interested in and invites us into relationship.
Okay. Is that like something that's within our like individual like interiority? Like is it something like is God outside of me or inside?
Yes, I think open and relational theology specifically is a type of process theology that would say this personal, knowable deity is experienced panentheistically. So God is accessible in all things. So we can experience God internally. We can experience God externally through, the wonders of nature, things like that, but is eternally self-coherent in all of that. So the difference between pantheism and panentheism would be that God is experienced in all things, but does not equal all. I don't know if that makes sense.
Okay. And so we've already kind of discussed how like the three qualities of God kind of map to parts in the internal system, like mother, father, and child.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but I'm not sure that that's like an adequate description of what you mean by God. Like what would be inadequate about, naming, mother and father and child, those archetypes as being like the whole concept. Like there must be more to it than that.
Yeah. It has to do with questions of creation and purpose. But yeah, so one of my guests helped me to think about it in a different way. But ultimately, I think what it comes down to, the position of Christianity, of theistic religions, is that this eternally existent being who created all things
Mm-hmm.
is interested in relationship with us in some way. And what I would say is there's so much that we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I'm open to so many different explanations and explorations of what that means. I don't think that anybody can say that they know, as complicated as it is to think about an eternally existent being that either sustains the creation of the universe as we know it, or is somehow like coexistent with the universe as we know it. The idea that it is personal, the idea that it wants us to know and wants us to experience in fullness a relationality that connects us to each other and to creation, that's compelling to me.
Okay.
So I don't think that this being has a specific plan or design for my life. I don't think that there is an intentionality that would determine anything about my existence. I think that there is an invitation to experience my reality in such a way that allows me to process the data that comes before me and that exists outside of me, and to co-create my present reality. And all I can say is that the invitation to co-create has to do with my presence, my sense of connection to, I like what you said about consensus reality. I like that idea. So that to me helps explain what it means to be present, to where I am and to when I am. But I think that invitation to co-create means that there are less boundaries than people think, and that the religious structures that are designed to sort of pacify and control us become less compelling when we realize that that we can do more than we think. I don't know. I'm feeling like I'm getting a little too metaphysical.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Yeah,
as you're
that's just what I
describing
think
this,
about.
as you're describing this, I was trying to decide like where your beliefs fit in my taxonomy, like because there's like I explained at the beginning of our interview, there's like a process beliefs and moral beliefs. Like would process belief is like would removing this belief change which practices I engage in? That's like the test.
Right.
And a moral belief would be like would removing this belief change how I respond to moral situations?
Right.
And it sounds like it's some of the beliefs you were naming would fit into those categories, but then it also feels like that there's some content beliefs there too, which are beliefs that wouldn't change the practices or how you respond to moral situations. I'm not sure though.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good distinction, a good question. I think if it turned out that, any conception that I have of divinity or reality was completely wrong, that wouldn't change the fact that I think the best I can possibly do as a person is to be the best version of myself, which means, at a very base level, like don't be an asshole, so to be curious, and connected to other people and to the world around me. I mean, we're part of this earth. We're part of this ecosystem. We're dependent on it. for our survival and not just that, but for thriving. And so the things that I do to other people affect me. The things that I do to the world around me affect me. So I think if I were to distill it, it would be like, that's the best way that I can think of to say it. Don't be an asshole, whether that's to other people or to the world around me. Just
Yeah.
to take care and to be curious.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else feels kind of superfluous, but that doesn't change how compelling it is. It doesn't change how interesting it is to think about and to try to engage with. And earlier in our conversation, you mentioned reincarnation. That's something that I've been fascinated by, especially in terms of the laws of thermodynamics. If energy isn't created or destroyed, then what happens to us when we die seems kind of open-ended. Like there's a couple of different possible explanations for that. And I think reincarnation is an interesting concept that deals with physical laws and what we do know about the universe. So trying to explore those metaphysics and map that onto science and what we can know is an interesting endeavor that usually winds up putting you at odds with a system that says you do as I say, or here are the answers, and we don't question those. So at some point you come against that wall and you realize either I'm stuck here and this is the way it is, or hey, this is just a man-made wall that I can climb over or break through or figure out something else to do.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I'm at now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful place to be.
It's difficult, but yeah, I mean, I just feel open and curious.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you were saying it's difficult, but like, I think, okay, so to have high conviction, to have beliefs that you have a high conviction in, like that's a very kind of comfortable place to be too, except that maybe the beliefs that you have conviction in, like whether they're true or not is that could be a problem. Like if they're not true, then you're following, beliefs that aren't going to serve you in the future. Feeling of uncertainty, like that can be a more challenging thing to get used to, but I think it serves you better in the long run.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. The image that came to mind is floating in the ocean. There's a certain sense of anxiety that comes with being unmoored from something, but there's also sort of a serenity that's part of that. One of the things that we taught our kids through the years is, you can't control the things that happen to you necessarily, but you can control how you respond to those things. And so there's sort of ownership over that reality that I don't know what is above or beneath me. I don't know how this works, but I do know a little. I know myself, or that's sort of the quest, is to know myself as best I can and then put that to work. So I'm a lot more comfortable now with unknowing than I was before. And that's part of the product of being part of a conservative evangelical religion. The currency there is certainty and the idea that we can know something unequivocally. And the things that I thought I knew, those turned out to not be true, or the things that I was told were not true. And so you can bury that and ignore it, or you can figure it out. So when did you become IFS certified?
Yeah, when was that? I think 2 or 3 years ago. I got passed through the certification process.
How long were you practicing before that, family therapy?
Yeah, I think it was about 18 months. They changed the requirements, like while I was in the application process, from 1 year to 2 years. So I kind of squeaked under the bar for that.
Nice. And you already mentioned that you feel the connection between your interests and what you're doing professionally. But what would you say is like your favorite part of what you're doing?
Well, I'm excited about the opportunities for doing, psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. Because like you could make really, really fast progress with clients. And I haven't had a chance to do that yet, but some of my clients are getting close, or approaching a psychedelic assisted session. There's an MDMA, a chemical similar to MDMA called 5-MAP-B, which is not a controlled substance. So it's like legally available. You can just buy it, and it's actually more suitable to talk therapy than MDMA. Like MDMA, what I've heard is that it acts very much like a stimulant. So it's like great for dancing. And 5-MAP-B is a bit less, like it has a bit less stimulation.
Mm-hmm. So are the psychedelics that you are going to have the opportunity to work with, are those like tightly controlled, like manufactured substances, or do you also get to incorporate like natural plant medicines like psilocybin and like other things?
Well, because I'm not, my psychotherapy isn't a religious practice, or my counseling isn't a religious practice, so I have to stay with legal substances. So even here in Oregon, like you're not allowed to work with psilocybin except through the state program, which is has way too many regulations. Like like it's too expensive. Like I can't justify it, and there's not enough demand also because of the regulations are too expensive. So I'm mostly interested in unregulated substances like 5-MAP-B and THH. Have you heard of THH? Okay. So the THH stands for tetrahydroharmine, and it's one of the components of ayahuasca or daime. And so ayahuasca is actually like has 3 psychoactives. There's at least 3. Like the main ones are harmine, THH, and DMT. And DMT is the psychoactive, which is similar to LSD or psilocybin. Like it's a very powerful serotonergic psychedelic. But THH is very interesting. It has a very kind of like subtle effect. It makes you kind of optimistic and gives you some emotional distance. And it makes it a little harder to sleep. But so I've been exploring THH. I find it very interesting.
Nice. Well, I want to be conscious of your time. We're hitting the hour and 45 mark. So I'm happy to wrap it up if you need to get going. But before we do, shamelessly promote yourself. Tell people where they can get a hold of you, ask questions, or maybe connect if they're in the area with the work that you're doing.
Sure. Thank you for that. So my book has an associated website. It's at unburdened.biz, B-I-Z. And you can also, my email address is there on the author page, so you can directly email me. Or if you want to work with me one-on-one, like I have a link to my counseling website there as well, which is at Estrella Counseling. Even if you're maybe not sure about the book, I would invite you to go to the book's website, because I have this book promo video which shows a Santo Daime ceremony taking place in the middle of the ocean on a shallow sandbar, and I think it came out really well. I think everyone would enjoy watching that video.
Yeah, the website looks very cool. I like the slider between the covers of your book. That's very cool. Yeah. So well done. Yeah, I'll check it out. And I'd love to have a follow-up and see if we can tease out some of the specific ideas that you're working with here. But I deeply appreciate you sharing some time and space with me, and let me know if I can help promote anything, and we'll work on getting you back in.
Okay, great. Well, I really enjoyed today's conversation, and I look forward to further discussions.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you so much.
Yep, you too.